Hey, everybody. It is Monday, July 22nd. Another historic week is upon us, Jill. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast, and I'm Mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news, try to keep up with the news, and read between the lines so you don't have to. Needless to say, another huge weekend. Events have been unfolding in the past couple of weeks, Jill, at a speed I haven't seen before. You know, it feels like a page of the 1960s right now.
As we were saying on the podcast on Friday, books can be written about this weekend alone, for real.
And they will be, right? There was last weekend with the assassination attempt, and then the convention and the J.D. Vance pick. The whole push in the past couple of weeks out of the debate to push Biden out. And then 1:45 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, the sitting president of the United States, with about 100 days to go to the election, withdraws from the race.
Couldn't write it or make it up if you tried. No,
in fact, there was actually an editorial from Aaron Sorkin, the creator of West Wing, that was out over the weekend that was being much discussed. We'll talk about that among other things. And I think this is actually kind of a plot line from Veep as well. That former show, Jill, where the president doesn't run for a second term and the Julia Louis-Dreyfus character the VP, Selena Meyer, gets to run. So Hollywood has come up with elements of this, but couldn't have written this one.
All right, so let's just get to the headlines here. In bombshell political news, President Biden withdraws from the presidential race and endorses Kamala Harris. But what comes next? Will Harris be the nominee with just a couple of weeks until the Democratic convention and about 100 days until the election? We've got reaction to the weekend shocker and what comes next for Democrats and how Republicans are reacting to it all. And Moshe, as if that wasn't enough, we had the largest global IT meltdown in history starting on Friday. It brought down computer systems around the world, airports, hospitals, 911 systems.
Yeah, Jill, in a matter of days, we had a presidential withdrawal and Y2K.
And Moshe, as if that was not enough, an update on the investigation into the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Remember that?
Jill, we had an interesting retraction from the Secret Service over the weekend. We'll tell you what they're saying now about what took place.
And a warning, the next time you go to the Deli counter, a Listeria outbreak has turned deadly in the United States. Plus the latest on the power outages that have led to multiple deaths in Houston, Texas. Overseas, a Houthi drone strike reaches the Israeli city of Tel Aviv, and Israel strikes back, what we know. And with the Olympics only days away, a scare for Team USA as the stacked men's basketball team has a close call with South Sudan. And Moshe has On This Day in History. Do we need On This Day in History if all of the news is historic?
You ask a good question, Jill. I have to say that in future years, we probably will just be talking about 2024 on this day in history. But needless to say, your clue today is Scaramouche. Oh, are you sure, Jill?
Oh, maybe not. Maybe my head is just
the clue again is Scaramouche, will you do the fandango?
Ah, okay.
There we go.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, let's just start with the big story here. President Biden dropped out of the 2024 race for the White House on Sunday, ending his bid for re-election after that presidential debate that raised doubts about his fitness for office with the election just 4 months away. He made the decision public via an historic and remarkable statement just before 2 p.m. Eastern time. And this upends the presidential race with just over 100 days to go until Election Day. For several weeks, the 81-year-old president mounted an effort to convince party leaders, donors, and voters that he still should be the nominee. But it did not work, as former President Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer were among those, along with dozens of members of Congress, who were part of an effort to convince him that he just couldn't win. Biden's decision Sunday came as he has been isolating at his Delaware beach house after being diagnosed with COVID last week, huddling with a shrinking circle of close confidants and family members about his political future. The president released a letter Sunday that read in part, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." Biden said he would address the nation later this week to provide detail about his decision. Right after, the president quickly endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to take on Trump and encouraged his party to unite behind her. She received immediate endorsements from a number of members of Congress, as well as former President Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Harris is hoping to consolidate party support in the next couple of days, and she appears to be the favorite for the nomination ahead of the August convention in Chicago. In a statement, she praised Biden's, quote, selfless and patriotic act and said that she intends to earn and win her party's nomination. She said, "I will do everything in my power to unite the Democratic Party and unite our nation to defeat Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda." Some history here. A party's presumptive presidential nominee has never stepped out of the race this close to the election. President Lyndon Johnson, who was besieged by an increasingly unpopular Vietnam War, he announced in March of 1968 that he would not seek another term after one primary. But Biden's July decision comes after more than 14 million Democrats have already voted supporting him through this primary process.
Yeah, just putting this in historic terms, we have never in American history had a sitting president announce he was going to be the nominee and then pull out at this stage. Jill, I mentioned it above, but it really feels like we're reliving the 1960s here. 1968 in particular, an assassination attempt, an unpopular war abroad, a Democratic incumbent stepping back, a Democratic convention in Chicago that could be open, ding, 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 ding. As the old quote goes that is sometimes attributed to Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And so it's been remarkable going through these past few weeks here, watching all of this unfold. So where does this leave us right now? Well, it appears Vice President Harris is in the driver's seat. In the first 24 hours, I would say even the first 12 hours, Jill, she has been contacting members of Congress, and the endorsements have been coming in one after another, including people that, people presumed might consider running against her or challenge her. You had Pete Buttigieg, Gavin Newsom, Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, Josh Harris. You also had the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, endorser. And so all of these came in really quickly. And it really goes to show that the Democratic Party, after having a very messy few weeks, doesn't seem to have the stomach to continue this several more weeks, even though there are people in the party who say, listen, we've already had a messy few weeks. Let's make sure after going through all of this and booting the president from the ballot, that we have the right nominee to go up against former President Trump. That said, she is the sitting vice president. She's been there for 3.5 years. She has the endorsement of President Biden. She has the endorsement of the Clintons, several members of Congress, the Congressional Black Caucus. She's working on the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. A number of people who would compete against her say they won't run against her. They might wait till 2028 if she loses, or 2032 if she wins. Now, there are a number of names we haven't mentioned yet. The Obamas. President Obama put out a statement on Sunday, just after, praising President Biden, not yet endorsing Kamala Harris. Now, what's behind that? Well, he has a good relationship with Kamala Harris, but President Obama sees himself as very influential in the party and doesn't want to look like this is just a coronation. He wants to ensure there's a process there before he endorses. Remember back in 2020, despite the fact that Biden was running against Elizabeth Warren and all these other Democrats, Obama didn't endorse his own vice president, saying, listen, I'm a former president. I'm going to sit back here. That's his view. You also have former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who played a very key role here in pushing Biden out, as we've told you about on this podcast. She didn't endorse Kamala Harris. She's also sitting back, waiting for an open process here. Now, what works in favor? Now, there's a number of factors here that work in Harris's favor. As I mentioned, sitting vice president, all these endorsements. It's easiest to transfer money to her because the campaign was always the Biden-Harris campaign. So it's an easy transfer of the $100 million of campaign funds. She would make history as the first female president, first Black female president. There's a generational change here. She's 59. She's 20 years younger than Trump. So she changes the dynamic there. There also is a sense sense of legitimacy that will be lacking here. Remember, all the primaries were held. 14 million Democrats and independents voted for Joe Biden here. He won the 95% or so of the delegates. Well, technically, she was on the ballot there, so there is the sense that she was a part of that process. So it appears, unless something really changes here, the trajectory from her very fast campaign here over the first few hours is that this is Kamala Harris's nomination to lose at this point. A reminder that the more than 4,000 delegates at the Democratic Convention who are meeting next month in Chicago are almost entirely Biden-Harris people. They were chosen by the Biden-Harris campaign to be their delegates. So the idea that they'll flip on her is exceedingly rare here. The DNC Rules Committee is set to meet tomorrow to discuss the rules of how to pick a new nominee here. They had planned a virtual nomination for Joe Biden on August 7th. We'll see if the date changes there or what they do in regards to this process, whether there will be any open process. Jill, the only name that was tossed about on Sunday that I saw was Joe Manchin, the West Virginia senator, the moderate, who incidentally left the Democratic Party earlier this year. He says he's going to return to maybe put up a challenge against Kamala Harris. Let's be blunt. Joe Manchin has no constituency in the Democratic Party, no real support there. So it's unclear what he would really be doing or whether he'd pose any sort of challenge there. But there are Democrats who say, listen, again, we've been through a lot here. Let's have a process.
It will be fascinating. And you mentioned, look, there's a feeling that, yes, technically she was on the ballot, right? So people did vote for her as part of the Biden-Harris ticket. But people are voting for the top of the ticket for the most part. And I think that it remains to be seen how voters react to this, to a situation where really the party leaders are anointing the nominee. Essentially, potentially, that, if that is what winds up happening, where they do pick Harris, that is going to be, as we've said numerous times, quite unprecedented. And again, it could backfire. It could not. It could very well be that the party does just coalesce around her, including the voters. But we'll see. Yeah,
you have to be old enough to remember the 1960s and before, when conventions used to select the nominee. Those of us who have voted and are familiar with elections starting in the 1970s are familiar with the primary process. So this is sort of OG choosing a candidate back before the primaries really mattered. And that's what's potentially happening here. But to your point, just to add on here, Kamala Harris ran for president in 2020 and actually dropped out before the first votes in the Democratic primary in 2020. She didn't run in 2024, right? She's the second person on the ballot. So technically, there has never been a single Democrat that has had the chance to vote for her in 2020 or 2024 as the top of the ticket. And as we talk about the future of democracy, anti-democracy, et cetera, you are hearing increasingly from the Republicans saying, you're accusing us of destroying democracy. You guys just took away the choice from your voters on the Democratic side. So you saw those talking points getting circulated and reinforced over and over again over the weekend. Jill, that was even what Donald Trump had to say on Saturdays.
And as you're seeing, the Democrat Party is not the party of democracy. They're really the enemies of democracy, the parties of corrupt insiders like Whitmer, special interests, and the failed political class. That's what they are. Under our leadership, the Republican Party is now the party of the people.
So these are remarks a day before the decision at a rally in Grand Rapids on Saturday. Donald Trump talking to his rally goers about 24 hours before the ultimate decision.
And he echoed that after the news actually broke. Former President Trump reacting on Sunday in a post on his Truth Social site in which he said that Biden, quote, was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve. He said that we will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly. He added, make America great again. While Trump and his team had made their preference for facing Biden clear, his campaign had nonetheless ramped up its attacks on Harris as pressure on Biden to step down intensified. Back again at a rally Saturday before Biden dropped out, Trump actually tried to poll people who were there on who they would prefer to run against.
So who would you like to most run against if you're us, if we want to win? Ready? Kamala Harris. Crooked Joe Biden.
So clearly there, Donald Trump having some fun there with the crowd. Certainly they had a game plan. It appeared they were in store for it appeared they were on pace for a landslide victory, Jill, in November. They will have to recalibrate a bit here when it comes to running against Harris, though they have some basic arguments here that they're going to use in the same way. They see her as part of this administration. The Biden-Harris policies are the same policies, unless, of course, she tries to distance herself in some ways in the fall. Remember, she was given the border as one of her main tasks. That has been a crisis for a few years. So that's something they're going to hit hard. They will blame her for inflation, like they blame Joe Biden. They're also increasingly, you're hearing from Republicans, Jill, accuse Democrats of a cover-up, covering up Joe Biden's medical condition. And so we'll see how they try to use that line against her, because she's been a defender saying, Joe Biden can run circles around me and has incredible energy, etc. So they're trying to. So one of the arguments that you're going to hear Republicans make, and they're going to make it against senators, against members of Congress, which is, again, what did you know and when did you know it when it comes to his condition? One of the notable things that came out over the weekend, you heard from a number of top Republicans on Capitol Hill, including the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who put out a statement. This is Johnson's. If Joe Biden is not fit to run for president, he's not fit to serve as president. He should resign the office immediately. So you have some of these Republicans saying, why should he even stay in office for 6 more months? Now, the argument from Biden is, this is not about the next 6 months. This was about 4 more years. I am in a place to serve for 6 more months. Nonetheless, you will be hearing those arguments from Republicans. And even some Republicans brought up the fact that on Sunday, he put out a letter. The White House put out no photos, no videos of the president, making what is a very historic announcement. Of course, he's recovering from COVID. His doctors were saying that he has a very bad cough right now, but still no pictures of the president on his historic day, at least as of this recording. One of the questions, Jill, that's been coming up all weekend on our premium account, that's where we do most of our weekend coverage on Instagram, is if it looks like Harris is in the driver's seat to become the next Democratic nominee, who would her VP choice be? Well, based on some of the reporting out there, there's a few names circulating. One is North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. Another is Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. Both men are notable because they are Democratic governors in red states who work across the aisle. In particular, North Carolina would be interesting with Cooper because that's a state that has a larger black population and might be key to Harris winning the Electoral College. You also have, we mentioned earlier, Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro. That's a key battleground state. He came out very quickly to endorse her. And then you have Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, another battleground state. He also happens to be a naval aviator and a former astronaut, Gabby Gifford's husband. And so he brings some things to the equation there. That said, this is not a lock yet, but it appears again that Harris is in a very good place to be the next Democratic nominee. But there is going to be interesting conversation, Jill, because a lot are asking, because you have a lot of people in the party who are like, can we just be done with this mess and unify? And some people are saying, no, there was a point to this mess. Let's not now shortcut the process now that we've finally gotten to the process. And frankly, there's frustration that Joe Biden didn't allow this to happen a year ago, that they didn't allow for a real primary, for him to drop out, for them to go through a cycle, have debates, figure out who the best candidates were going to be, that ultimately he did this so late in the game that Democrats are not going to have a real tried and true process to figure out who their best contender is for the fall.
As we have talked about, polls show that Harris, while more popular than President Biden, not that much more popular than President Biden, and a lot of other candidates, a lot of other Democrats poll better against Donald Trump. So to your point and to some of these Democrats' point, if they're going to go through this whole thing and Biden's going to drop out,
what was the point of all this?
If they're going to lose regardless, what was the point?
So, it's interesting you brought up the numbers. So what's interesting about Kamala Harris, Jill, is, first of all, across the board, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, all have more Americans who find them unfavorable than favorable. They're all what's called in the water. They're all what's called under the water when it comes to their polling numbers. Now, in 2024, that's when Joe Biden became less favorable than Donald Trump. And that's when you saw the collapse of his numbers. Even so, there has never been a point in time in a decade where Donald Trump has had more Americans who like him than dislike him, going back to 2015. And that's what gives Democrats hope, is that in the last 10 years, there's never been a single poll out of tens of thousands of polls, Republican polls, Democratic polls, media polls, that show more Americans liking Trump than disliking Trump. At times during Biden's presidency, he was more liked than unliked. And then since August 2021, he's been underwater. So he's gone 3 years now where more Americans have disliked him than liked him on a national level. And then most recently, being even more disliked than Trump. So the view from Democrats was, let's get rid of Biden and at least we have a shot here, because ultimately it's not that people love Donald Trump. It's that they really, really, really dislike Joe Biden. Well, when you look at favorability numbers, who's even with Joe Biden overall in favorability and unfavorability? Kamala Harris. Now, the polls you were bringing up are on a state-by-state level, where it showed that she's slightly more competitive in Pennsylvania, in Virginia, in some other states against Donald Trump. But on an overall favorability level, she has some of the same issues as Joe Biden does. Now, how will she find a way to differentiate herself? Can she turn over a new leaf? Now Americans will be paying attention to her in a new way, since we don't really ever pay attention to vice presidents. So there's a lot of questions here. And it's being done on a very truncated timeline.
In the words of Jay-Z, allow me to reintroduce myself.
My name is
that's
Kamala.
I mean, that's basically what the next couple of weeks, the next few months are going to be.
Well, she also had a very tough beginning of the administration. She was given a bunch of tasks that she didn't want. There's a lot of leaking, a lot of staffing issues, et cetera. So 2021 was a tough year for her, and she has since tried to recover from that. The question, of course, is, did America get certain impressions of Kamala Harris? And will she be able to frame herself? Will she be able to, as you say, reintroduce herself in a way that will enable her to be competitive with Donald Trump here? And again, we hold out the caveat that it might not be her, but at least in the first 24 hours, it's increasingly looking like it's going to be her. Jill, between now and tomorrow's podcast, who knows what'll happen, but we'll be here for you to give you the latest.
And Moshe, somehow, some way, there are a ton of other very big stories happening in the world. So let's get to it. Now to the largest IT outage in history that took down airports, companies, 911 lines, and other key infrastructure around the world Friday. Businesses worldwide grappled with an ongoing major IT outage as financial services and doctors' offices were disrupted, while some TV broadcasters went offline. Air travel was hit particularly hard, with planes grounded, services delayed, and airports issuing advice to passengers around the world. The outage came as cybersecurity company CrowdStrike experienced a major disruption early Friday following an issue with a recent tech update. Security experts said CrowdStrike's routine update of its widely used cybersecurity software, which caused clients' computer systems to crash globally, apparently did not undergo adequate quality checks before it was deployed. The latest version of its sensor software was meant to make CrowdStrike clients' systems more secure against hacking by updating the threats that it defends against. But faulty code in the update files resulted in one of the most widespread tech outages in recent years for companies that were using Microsoft's Windows operating system, which is a lot. CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz said the issue was not a cyber attack, but a content update, adding that the company is actively working with customers that are impacted by a defect found.
Yeah, so some companies were able to get back online Friday, some Saturday. Some were still struggling as of Sunday, Jill. More than 1,500 flights across the U.S. were canceled on Sunday as airlines were still struggling to recover from that tech issue back on Friday. It left thousands of passengers stranded at airports, thousands more delayed. Jill, as people were walking through airports, we were sent hundreds of photos from people with the images, that blue screen of death, that error screen that was pretty much ubiquitous in airports around the world. Keep in mind, when we're talking about CrowdStrike, that's a company based in Texas, and they happen to be And they happen to be one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the world. Their customers are a who's who, Jill. They work with more than half of the Fortune 500, nearly 300 of the 500 biggest companies in the world, 8 of the top 10 financial services firms, 7 of the top 10 manufacturers in the world, and 43 of the 50 states. I heard from some people who work for cities and state municipalities. I heard from some people on Friday, Jill, who worked for states and cities who were told by their bosses not to come in because the computer system was down. Following the outage here, the company did provide an initial fix through a software update, but many computers were still not working. I got advice from somebody that you actually had to reset your computer at least 15 times for the fix to take. And so people were going through that process. And we're talking about large corporations, Jill, but we're also talking about small businesses. Whether it's small employers who couldn't pay their employees on Friday, psychiatrist offices that were hobbled because their virtual assistants or therapists couldn't make phone calls on their behalf, restaurants dealing with payment to vendors and workers. So really, just around the world, this was quite a fiasco. This is sort of what we feared with Y2K, if you remember that 24 years ago, that didn't transpire. And this, again, CrowdStrike sends out a piece of code meant to make things better, and everything went down. We'll see what happens next here because of CrowdStrike's influence in the market and their market share here. The Federal Trade Commission did put out a statement weighing in on this without mentioning the companies. They blamed the outage on a concentrated market power, which creates fragile systems. So the Federal Trade Commission, remember, they file lawsuits sometimes when it comes to monopolies. So imagine they'll be looking into this further. After what happened.
Time for the speed read from the Washington Post, the latest on the investigation into the Donald Trump assassination attempt. Top officials at the Secret Service repeatedly denied requests for additional resources and personnel sought by Trump's security detail in the 2 years leading up to his attempted assassination at a rally in Pennsylvania last Saturday. Agents charged with protecting the former president requested magnetometers and more agents to screen attendees at sporting events and other large public gatherings that Trump attended, as well as additional snipers and specialty teams at other outdoor events. The requests were sometimes denied by senior officials at the agency, who cited various reasons, including a lack of budget at an agency that has long struggled with staffing shortages. And while it doesn't appear there was a specific request for additional staff at last weekend's rally in Pennsylvania, this latest revelation does stand in contrast to initial Secret Service statements. The Secret Service initially denied turning down requests for additional security, but they are now acknowledging that, yes, some may have been rejected. The revelation comes as agency veterans say the organization has been forced to make difficult decisions amid competing demands, a growing list of protectees, and limited funding.
Yeah, you might remember earlier last week, the Secret Service saying, no, we have provided all the security that everyone needed. And now it comes out in the Washington Post report over the weekend. And I imagine, Jill, they'll be talking about extensively on Capitol Hill today, that the Secret Service did deny some requests. Now, notable in this story, it does not appear as of now that any of the denied requests to the Trump security team were related to this Pennsylvania rally. It was related to other venues. These rejections have pitted Trump and his Secret Service team against headquarters because Trump likes to do these big outdoor rallies, likes to go to sports stadiums with tens of thousands of people. And the Secret Service said, we just don't have the staff to cover you. Can you please reconsider what you're doing here? And they went ahead with it anyway. So it does appear there's going to be a back and forth here between the Secret Service and the Trump campaign. There was an incident in South Carolina last year where they were particularly concerned. He was doing this open air downtown square rally with a number of large commercial and residential buildings, and they had asked for more snipers, more security. And Secret Service says, we just don't have the resources for this. Keep in mind, in recent years, Secret Service is taking on a lot more protectees. They have the president, the vice president, their families. The formers are getting more threats. You also have now you have RFK Jr. They've just added on J.D. Vance. Other administration officials who are facing threats. We talked about the Iranian assassination threat against Mike Pompeo, against John Bolton, and others. And Secret Service has had staffing shortages and funding issues and hiring limits going back more than a decade now. So they're stretched thin. as they're dealing with all of this. And what's interesting here is the Washington Post actually put forth these detailed questions to Secret Service following their denials. And they're like, no, actually, you're right. Yeah, we did look into it, and we have denied some of these Trump team requests. So we'll see what happens. We should note on Capitol Hill today, the Secret Service Director, Kim Cheadle, will be testifying 10 a.m. Eastern time this morning. She'll be going before the House Oversight Committee. Jill, the Democrats have a lot of questions. The Republicans have a lot of questions. The Secret Service actually asked to delay this hearing, and the Democrats and Republicans said in unity, no, we need you on Capitol Hill answering questions now.
From USA Today, 2 people in the United States have died and 28 people have been hospitalized from a multi-state outbreak of listeria linked to sliced deli meat. This is according to federal health officials. A dozen states in the Midwest and East Coast reported that people recently became ill from listeria. That is a bacteria that causes potentially foodborne illnesses and is especially concerning during pregnancy. The deaths occurred in Illinois and New Jersey. New York has had 7 cases, the most of any state. The sick people's samples were collected over 6 weeks from late May to early July. In interviews, 16 of the 18 people who were sick said that they ate meats sliced at deli counters, most commonly deli sliced turkey, liverwurst, and ham.
Yeah, so fair warning there. The CDC is investigating which types of meat may have been contaminated. There is no evidence right now that prepackaged deli meat made anybody sick, but people should avoid eating meat sliced at deli counters unless they heat those meats up to 165 degrees or until they're steaming hot. Those are the regulations the CDC recommends there. A reminder here that listeria can cause severe illness when the bacteria spreads beyond the gut to other parts of the body. It's especially concerning for pregnant women. As far as symptoms, anyone exposed to the disease can experience a headache, stiff neck, confusion, loss of balance, and convulsions at times. And Jill, just fair warning here, the symptoms usually begin a week to 4 weeks after a person eats contaminated food, but they can start as early as the same day or up to 70 days after. So I had some people on the Instagram over the weekend being like, okay, I'm going to think I have listeria for the next 2 months. So just be cautious, folks, as you buy your deli meat.
And I thought the 14-day window for COVID was a little bit insane.
Yeah, try 2 months for listeria.
From the Associated Press, almost 2 weeks after Hurricane Beryl hit, heat-related deaths during the prolonged power outages have pushed the number of storm-related fatalities to at least 23 in Texas, mainly in the Houston area. The combination of searing summer heat and residents unable to power up air conditioning in the days after that Category 1 storm made landfall on July 8th resulted in increasingly dangerous conditions for many people in America's 4th largest city.
Yeah, we're hearing from a lot of you in Houston, 90-degree plus temps, no AC for more than a week. Remember that heat is the leading cause of death when it comes to weather-related events. Reminder, Beryl knocked out electricity for more than 3 million homes and businesses at the height of the outages. A number of them lasted days or longer. Power was finally restored to most homes last week, but not all. Several of you in the mo.news community saying, I still don't have power. The slow pace here in Houston has put the regional electric provider, it's called CenterPoint Energy, under a lot of scrutiny. The governor there is under a lot of scrutiny about whether it's sufficiently prepared, especially given that you could see more storms in Houston this summer.
This story from NPR. The Israeli military said on Saturday that it had struck targets in the Houthi-controlled regions of Yemen following the months-long series of 200 Houthi terror attacks on Israeli targets. The first time those attacks turned deadly, though, was Friday, when a drone assault on Tel Aviv killed an Israeli citizen and injured 10 others, and that led to the first Israeli retaliation this weekend. The Israeli Defense Forces said the locations bombed by its fighter jets in Yemen had been military targets. The airstrikes targeted gas and oil depots and a power station that Israel said were used for military purposes, and they hit a port controlled by the Houthis that contains oil exports.
Yeah, the Israelis say that they've been using this port to bring in weapons from Iran. Remember, Iran sponsors, funds, and arms the Houthi rebels, along with a number of other terror groups around the region. So therefore, the Israelis saw this as a legitimate military target. They flew several F-35 and F-15 fighter jets. It's about 1,000 miles away from Israel down there to reach Yemen. The Israelis said, we didn't respond for months, but ultimately this deadly drone strike in Tel Aviv tipped the scales here. So they felt the need to respond. Now, the Houthis say that they will respond back. You already saw missiles launched on Israel again on Sunday. None of those hit their target. But that said, this is another escalation in the overall regional situation there. And Jill, I imagine that'll be among the topics that comes up this week with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu visiting Washington. He's set to give an address to Congress. He's set to meet with Joe Biden He's set to meet with Joe Biden at the White House on Tuesday. So that's going to be one of the many stories we're watching out of Washington this week.
From the Associated Press, a close call for Team USA. LeBron James saved the U.S. men's basketball team from what would have been a stunning loss. His layup with 8 seconds left was the go-ahead basket Saturday. And the U.S. Olympic team that'll soon head to the Paris Games escaped with a 101-100 win over South Sudan in London. They rallied from a 16-point deficit to avoid perhaps the biggest upset in the program's history. South Sudan, the African nation that has gained its independence just 13 years ago and is about to play in the Olympics for the first time, led for more than half the game and had a chance to win at the end, but missed with about 4 seconds left. And the Americans survived.
Jill, just to note that this team, which is a bunch of NBA All-Stars, the best basketball players in the world, was favored. Team USA was favored by 43.5 points over South Sudan. They ended up winning by 1. Now, this was a showcase game. The result here didn't count, but it still is a huge wake-up call. Remember, the Americans will be going to the Olympics. They'll actually face South Sudan in one of their group matchups later this month. And this could have been one of the most monumental upsets in the history of basketball. Clearly, the NBA players a bit lackadaisical here. Just for a sense of the numbers, the U.S. roster has 12 players. All of them are All-Stars or NBA champions or both. They have collectively scored 189,000 points in their NBA regular season careers. They have a combined nearly 8,000 starts. South Sudan, a few years old. Its maiden voyage to the Olympics. Their team has combined 1,200 points in the NBA and have started 19 games. Again, 189,000 points to 1,200 points. 8,000 starts to 19 starts. So clearly the players on Team USA took it a little too easy, LeBron saving the day there. Hopefully it's a wake-up call for them when they head to the Olympics, which starts, by the way, on Friday.
So you know how we say like presidents from the beginning of their term to the end of their term look like they age 10, 15, look like they age 20 years?
Yeah.
All I saw this morning when I turned on the TV was like a picture of LeBron James, and he looked like he aged 20 years in this game. He's like, what happened? What is going on? And then I saw the headline, and then I read the story.
They got out by pure luck, Jill. Like South Sudan missed a basket that could have won the game for them. That's what happened. So it'll be a slightly more compelling men's Olympic basketball games to watch in the next couple of weeks than we thought with these. Again, we were favored by 43 points and got out with a 1-point win. All right, now time for On This Day in History, Jill. We begin in 1937. On this day, the Senate voted down Franklin Roosevelt's court packing plan. He actually had a plan to expand the Supreme Court from 9 justices to 15 justices. Why? Well, FDR didn't like the fact that the Supreme Court during that time was voting down a bunch of his initiatives as unconstitutional. So what did he decide to do? Let's add some more justices to the court. So he planned to expand it to 15. The Senate voted down the plan on this day in 1937. And so just so you know, as we talk about the Supreme Court, et cetera, previous presidents had these issues. We've talked about expanding. We've talked about expanding the court for a number of years. FDR actually tried to do it. All right, staying in that era, on this day in 1943, General George Patton, leading the Allied forces, took the northwest corner of Sicily, giving them a strategic foothold from which to invade Italy. A lot is made of D-Day and that invasion, how important that was, the Russians and their invasion from the east. But this was the important southern front, Jill, in destroying the forces of the Italians and the Nazis. All right, fast forward here to the 1990s, a bit of pop culture history for you. On this day in 1996, The Daily Show premiered for the first time on Comedy Central, hosted by Craig Kilborn. He would host it for about 2 years, launching the show initially, and then a young Jon Stewart would take the reins in early 1999 and anchor the show for about 16 years. Of course, he leaves in 2015. Trevor Noah takes over, and now Stewart is back. At least he's back one day a week right now. All right, a bit of royal history for you. On this day in 2013, the first child of Prince William and Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, is born. That is Prince George. So a happy 11th birthday to Prince George today. And we end here with the clue from the beginning of today's pod. On this day in history, Jill, in 2019, Queen's iconic Bohemian Rhapsody video reached 1 billion views on YouTube, making it the first pre-1990s visual to reach 1 billion views on the platform. Just checked today, about 5 years later, we're reaching about 2 billion views for the Bohemian Rhapsody music video.
And of course, somehow I was immediately thinking about Anthony Scaramucci.
Scaramucci, as opposed to Scaramouche. Will you do the Fandango?
The former White House communications director under Trump.
For like a hot second.
How long did he last?
I think it was 11 days. I think Scaramucci is an 11-day time period. But back to the song, Jill. If you look at the history of the song, apparently Freddie Mercury of the band came in and told bandmates that he had enough material for 3 songs, but was actually thinking of blending all the lyrics into one long extravaganza. Hence Bohemian Rhapsody, where if you listen to it, depending on what time you're listening to it, it does sound like 3 different songs. And so they go ahead with this, and the record label is like, absolutely not. Like, no radio station is going to play a 6-minute song like this. They want 3-minute songs. And Queen said, we don't care. We're making this song. And so ultimately they found some friendly DJs out there that played the song. And of course, it is an iconic song. Among other things, Jill, gives me good memories of Wayne's World.
Yeah, Wayne's World really gave that song a second life. All right, Moshe, that is a wrap on a historic weekend, a historic podcast.
Jill, it's been a historic 25 days. It's been 25 days since that debate.
Thank you all for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. Yeah, we put out the video, a clip from the podcast on Friday celebrating our 5 million downloads. So if you're on Instagram, please feel free to reshare that. Review us as we are on the road here, Jill, to 10 million downloads. 10 million, here we come. All right. Bye, everybody.